Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got an interesting show today because we're going to be talking about unexplained death. There is so much to know about when a child dies, how they died, why they died. People want to know that, but it's not always clear.
It's not, Mom, and even with Scott, I had questions about how they died. I mean, I knew they died in a car accident, and I knew the car hydroplaned, but there were just questions about how does this happen, how could this happen, what happened in the last seconds. I wanted as many details as we could get, and there were still some questions that went unexplained for me.
Yeah, and those are accidental loss, but there's still a question, even people that I know who have loss in hospitals and that kind of thing, they really want to know why they died, even in the hospital. It's sometimes very, very unclear. So I know there are many of you watching this show today who've had that happen. You may be experiencing anger, frustration, resentment, whatever. We're going to talk about a couple of people who've had those types of losses, and we want to see how they've gotten through it, how they've dealt with it, so that we can help you do the same.
Yep, so we've got two guests today, and they're both bereaved moms, and they're both involved in the Compassionate Friends. And let me introduce them. One of our guests is Annah Elizabeth, our first guest, and she's been on our show before in Tucson, Arizona. And Annah wrote a book called Digging for the Light. She is the co-author of the Grief Diaries series as well. She is the creator of the Five Facets Philosophy of Healing, and she is a coach and an energy healer.
And also, she lost a child.
Oh yeah, she lost the baby.
Right after birth, right?
Correct. He lived 26 minutes.
26 minutes, okay.
And she's got questions around that, around his death and what happened at the, when he died. And then there's Theresa Lervolino. Did I say it right?
Avellino. Nobody ever gets it right.
Avellino. Avellino. Drop the L, right?
Nobody ever gets it right. It's an I. Yeah.
Theresa Lervolino. Okay. And Teresa is now on the National Board of Directors for the Compassionate Friends with me, Mom.
Oh, wow, wonderful.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank
I was
you
on it for
so
6
much.
years.
Yeah.
Thank you. I look forward to serving.
So I will be serving with her, which I'm looking forward to. And she speaks about domestic violence and speaks all over the place. She lost her daughter Jessica in a car accident, and there are some questions around that loss and what happened exactly.
I'll have to say that you're not sure about it, and I know one of the things MAD says when there's it's not an accident, it's a crash for them. So you might want to say your daughter died in a car crash, because who knows? When there's questions, that's what they say anyway.
That's usually what I do.
Which
so
I
in
thought
other
was
words,
interesting.
what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is that maybe it wasn't accidental.
Right, yeah.
Because I know there was somebody else in the car, and we'll be talking with Teresa about this. And Teresa really has a lot of thoughts about the fact that this person maybe caused this. Teresa is also a chapter leader in both Florida and Long Island.
Let's talk a little bit with you first, Anna, about, is it Annah Elizabeth? Do we use both?
Either one. As my husband says, just don't come late for dinner.
So let's talk about, you had this baby, and I know you've had multiple losses, but we really wanted to talk about this one loss today because you weren't sure what happened, were you?
Clinically, we know what happened. He aspirated on the baby, the first stool, which they call the meconium. Typically, that's not an uncommon thing for babies to experience during delivery, but in his case, what is uncommon is that it was fatal. It's usually not fatal.
Now, were you wondering why that happened and
Why it was fatal?
Why it was fatal, and did the hospital screw up, and did they do suction on those babies sometimes?
Yeah, so it was actually an emergency C-section. Back in the day, I went into labor at 2 o'clock in the morning and was tracking all the contractions and keeping my little log, and called the doctor. It was my first child, so followed all the directions to the letter, so to speak. When I got there, they said, "Oh, you're not dilated, go home." I'm like, "I've been in labor for 12 hours. This can't be not real." And so the doctor instructed the nurse to hook me up to the monitors. And when they did, she could see it with every contraction. The baby's heartbeat was dropping. So they brought in a team immediately. They ended up calling a code blue and did an emergency C-section. And that he lived 26 minutes, but then he died. So I did have I did have questions. Was there, of course, well-intentioned friends and other people? Was it doctor error? Was it medical error? What happened? Was he sick? It hadn't been determined. And I ended up having 2 miscarriages after that birth, in between some live births. And I saw a high-risk specialist, and I said to him one day, "What do you think caused his death?" And he said to me, "It's usually not fatal." And so he must have somehow been compromised or weakened, in a weakened state that we just didn't realize. And so for me, that was closure. For some people, that wouldn't be. But for me, this little light bulb went off. And it's, sometimes there just aren't answers.
Right.
And if I keep pursuing those questions and insisting that there's something more than just the unknown, then ultimately I'm prolonging my own suffering.
Well, and you're kind of torturing yourself if there's not going to be any resolution. If you're going to find out, it's a different story. But if you're not, then it's like, okay, I'm going to keep replaying how, why, when, over and over and over.
And we could talk about your miscarriages too, because you had several miscarriages, and I know you've talked about it, Heidi, because you had miscarriages. What did I do wrong?
Right.
You know, did I drink too many Diet Cokes?
Right.
You know, what did I do to cause this experience? Again, the question comes, why? Why?
Because
why?
And you want to know why, because I've had 2 miscarriages, and I know you've had some, Anna, but we want to know why so that it won't happen again. It's like, okay, it's like you've had a loss and you're terrified it's going to happen again, so how can I control it and make sure that it never happens to again?
And in my case, I was a smoker. And so when Gavin died, that was a burden that I carried, was that somehow played a part. I had cut way back, but I wasn't able to fully quit. And I was only having one or two a day, but that still plagued me. And again, this high-risk specialist that I saw, who I'm really grateful for, said that that wasn't a contributing factor to his death. You did not cause his death. When the first miscarriage came, I had quit smoking, and so that wasn't a factor. But as you say, that not knowing, and that miscarriage actually was in the first stages of the 2nd trimester, and my doctor at the time had said to me, it's a less than 4% chance of miscarriage, because they had seen the heartbeat and done an ultrasound. So that was honestly torture for me, because I'm like, okay, now I have something that shouldn't have been fatal. It was fatal, and now I have a miscarriage that should have been less than 4%. All the guilt and the shame and those unknown questions then continued. But it's been 28 years since Gavin died, so now I know that I've accepted for my own healing that there are just some things that can't be explained.
And we want to talk about how you got there.
Yes.
So we'll be talking about that. Now let's talk about your experience, Teresa.
Certainly. My daughter Jessica was 27. This happened 8 years ago, and she was moving into the city. Very excited, and she was with a boyfriend.
The city, which is New York City.
This is New York.
I'm assuming we in the West think San Francisco is the city.
Okay, this city.
Teresa's definitely a New Yorker.
This city, I'm a New Yorker. Yeah, sorry about that.
No.
So she was with him for a while, and she just wanted a fresh start. And I think things weren't working out, because I had seen that she was going through some changes, and I would talk to her about it, and she just explained that she wanted to kind of just go into a whole new direction. So it was a Friday night, and it was about 11:30, and she came downstairs, and I'll never forget it. It was just the cutest thing, because she always dressed up, but her hair was flat, not all curled up.
Is beautiful.
Oh,
we
thank
are
you.
showing a picture of
Thank
her
you.
on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I know that I said she looked like a model, and you said, well, she actually was one.
She did. She just was stunning. And she came down in kid sneakers, rolled up jeans, and a denim jacket, and a little white tank. And I said, where are you going? It's 11:30. And she said, John, her ex-boyfriend, said to pick him up. And I said, oh, I don't like this at all. I said, please don't go. And I begged her.
Because he was drunk, right?
Well, I didn't know it. Well, she said to me, she said, Mom, and her exact words were, Mom, he is so drunk right now, and if I don't go and get him, he's dumb enough to get behind the wheel of the car and kill somebody. I said, Jessica, I'm just not comfortable with the situation. So she left, and I fell asleep, and next thing I knew, I had police officers screaming at me to get to the hospital. I mean, I was stunned, and they were yelling not at me to get to the hospital. What happened was there was an off-duty police officer behind them that saw a hand go over, and it was his hand that went over. We found out that his alcohol level was 0.35, and her toxicology reports were 0 across the board. I found out afterwards that he was abusing her, and I didn't know. So if you do the math, it kind of makes sense. So we did get the police involved, and they said to me, do we think that he did something to her? Absolutely. The off-duty police officer behind them saw the hand go, and then he just saw the car veer off because she was driving very straight in the right lane. But try to convince the DA of that, and I did. But they said, unfortunately, the only two people that tell the story is one tells one story and the other one is no longer here.
So he's still living, is what you're saying?
He's still living, and but here's much to what you just said, and I will now. For me, I don't have closure, and I don't think I don't think I could ever have closure on the fact that Jessica's no longer with me.
Right.
But I have forgiven him inside, because I had to be able to move forward. But more importantly than the closure, somebody said to me in one of my chapter meetings here in New York, quite recently actually, how about instead of thinking the worst, why don't you think that maybe he was just gently putting his arm across and reaching out to hold her and pull her close? And that's how the accident happened. So that's what I've decided to put in my head, that it was a gentle touch, and that it was nothing nefarious.
So you've changed the picture.
I changed the picture for myself.
And he's telling you that that's what happened, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
He actually said they had an argument in the car, but I've never been able to get past that, and neither have the police.
Well, I like the reframe because it reminds me of something that happened when I was working with the FDNY families. There were 3 firefighters that were huddled together in a stairwell that were found dead. They were the only people that were found dead. Everything else was remains, basically. And they were huddled like this, and the widows were very horrified by that image because they felt that these firefighters were trapped in terror and fear and knew that they couldn't get out and they were going to die. But what we said as a research team at Columbia, because we were a research team working with them, what about, they were very Catholic, all of them, what about imagining that they were huddled together in prayer and going towards the light into the next world? Because we really don't know what was going on. Maybe they were at peace and all hugging each other, moving into the next world. And that changed so much for them because they were not trapped in the trauma narrative anymore. They were in a place of peace, and it really helped their journey. So I'm liking that you're trying to make meaning and sense out of this last minute.
It did. That's exactly what helped me, because I knew that there was one piece that was missing for me that I just couldn't reconcile with, and it was the fact that it was still unexplained. So I decided to put my own story to it, and I like my story.
I like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned about closure. Words are so important. As a writer, one of the things that I've learned over the years is different words have different meaning and connotations for different people. So acceptance maybe is another word for me that maybe some of your listeners and the people watching, because it doesn't close what happened, but for me it released some of those questions that were plaguing me and contributing to suffering that was ongoing. So it was a way of just accepting that, okay, this is, so the closure was in that piece of suffering, that piece. There, as we know, there are many. There's not just one.
My favorite word, and the one that I use in my chapter, or at least, and I certainly don't force it on anyone, but I just suggest that this could be a good word to use, and I use it for myself, is resignation. I have no choice My daughter is gone. So for me, there's no closure. I can't accept it. And some people can accept it. I'm just one of those that can't. So I prefer resignation. I'm resigned to the fact that she is gone.
Right.
And so that is something that I have to live with, and I do.
And how long's it been since?
It's 8 years, April 25th. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
so you just had an anniversary.
I did, and yeah, you know.
8 years is not a long
I was
time
just
in
thinking
the
that.
child
It's not.
loss world.
No, it's not.
No,
And I
it's
also-
not.
I think that, you know, you're still on the path,
Yeah.
you know.
I am still
towards-
on my journey,
Yeah.
and for me, I think my journey works best helping others. That's how I feel good.
Talk a little bit about the Compassionate Friends,
Sure.
because I know you said that it saved your life, basically, and
It
that
did.
you were really struggling before you
was.
started. Talk about that, because what's it done for you?
Sure. You know, one of the things that I've always said is we in Compassionate Friends use that term, and I've used it all the time, saved our lives, and I know it's a contrived, you know, phrase, but the fact is that it made us able, it didn't save our lives from breathing, but it enabled me to be able to find my hope, to breathe again. No, I shouldn't say breathe, to breathe
A lifeline.
in again, you know? It was a lifeline, and my first 3 or 4 months, I just sat and stared. I was stopping beautiful girls in the street from behind that had long black hair, and I said, Jessica, and I really did that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about Compassionate Friends.
Normal.
See, it's so normal. There's nothing abnormal.
I'm sure when you said that, other parents were like, yes, we
Yes.
get it, we've done that before.
There's nothing in Compassionate Friends that's abnormal.
Right.
And I found as time went on that it wasn't just that I needed the group, but I found that people needed
You.
me. And so I said, well, what else can I do for this organization? And I don't know how, but somehow it just blossomed
Yeah.
without my help at all in some cases.
And
But
now you're on the national board, so you are
I'm
going to be
so
doing a lot of things with your
excited about that. I'm
Yeah.
so excited.
Yeah.
I really am. And, you know, I would say to anybody that Compassionate Friends is the one place where we, as grieving parents, siblings, grandparents, doesn't matter how old our children are, doesn't matter how long they're gone, it's the one place where we can all go into one place and look at each other and know what we're thinking. But more importantly, everything that we say to each other, we understand. We
Right.
felt it, we've been there, and we know what it feels like. Unlike what I call the civilians, I call them civilians that try to understand us, but they can't because they don't know what it's like to have that constant pain. And I'm sure that after all of the, you know, your years and your years, I'm sure that pain is still
No, it's not on the
Piercing.
level yours is.
no.
No
Okay.
way.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah.
That's one thing I try to tell people
Yeah.
when they say you don't ever get over it. I'm like, really? Who wants to get over it?
Right.
I don't want to be dead inside. When something comes up for me, I want to feel it, but I recover very, very quickly. It's not. It's not. It's
Yeah.
just different. Your
a
pain
different
does
level,
go
yes.
on a different level. And you're saying.
It does. And one of the things in all the workshops that I do and the speaking that I do, I'm truly able to say to people, I stand before you and say, I no longer mourn my son. I don't mourn my son. That's not to say that there are not moments when I'm not sad. Like the woman that we were pregnant, my best friend, we were pregnant together. Our boys were born 2 weeks apart, almost to the hour, to the day. So when he graduated high school, there was a little wistfulness.
Yeah.
That's what I say. It is wistful. I wonder what Gavin would be doing. And then when I got his save the date announcement for his marriage and the birth of his children, there was wow, I wonder what Gavin would be doing. But I love what you said, and it's what I say all the time. It's just different. So now I recognize that the relationship that I have with him is different than the one that we expect to take place on earth. So I imagine him guiding and leading this work that I'm doing from the other side. He's my partner in helping bring healing to this work.
I always say that. I say Scott's my guiding light.
I do with Jessica.
But it truly, it's
our new normal.
It is a process.
Yeah.
And that process has many moving parts. And part of the work that I do is helping people identify, okay, this is a part, and I want to work on this part to find, I use the word resolution, and I love your word resignation too. And so to do that, and eventually you can pluck all those pieces out and find what works for you, the language that works for you, the help that works for you, the thinking, all of that, so that you're at peace and you're not suffering.
Right. But you know what's interesting about this conversation is, Teresa, you said, okay, you know, the pain is so difficult, and it probably always will be, and everybody was quick to reassure you that, no, we're in different spaces. That's not always comforting for parents to hear, or for siblings to hear. Sometimes it's scary, because sometimes I think people that are grieving think the pain represents the connection, and when people that are further along say, oh, we're not in that space, it's like, wait a minute, what? But that's my connection. Are you still connected at all? And are you even thinking about that person, or have you moved to the next chapter? And I always, for me, and I know for a lot of people that are as far along as I am, because I'm very far, I'm 35 years, I'm still very connected to Scott, but I am connected with his life and the way he lived, and not the way he died. So for me, I used to be connected to the pain, and now I'm connected to the other part of the other part.
Right.
But yes, you still remain very, very connected without that agonizing pain.
What I try to do, when her birthday comes, when her passing date comes, instead, where the first 2 or 3 years I would, you know, post these Facebook messages of just complete loss and devastation. And now, and I do say this, I always try to celebrate her life, and that is what's important to me. I do become, it is very emotional, not so much her birthday, but it's just the passing date that still, you know, affects me in a way. For me to feel better, what I find that makes me feel better is to make somebody else feel better. I walk out sometimes of a meeting or even on a phone call where I am helping somebody take that step forward, where they say to me, sometimes they call me after a month that their child has passed, and they don't believe me when I say to them, you will find hope, you will find
actually
peace.
Will be able to get out of bed, and you actually might find your shoes.
You will go shopping, you will enjoy it, you know? And you will laugh again, and you will smile again. And those are the messages that I try to say in the meetings and with the phone calls.
It's nice to see people that are, it's nice to kind of do an inventory, okay, here I am. I actually am not where I used to be. You know, when we help each other people, we kind of see that.
Right.
Well, Annah Elizabeth, you do these 5 Facets of Grief philosophy, and you do retreats?
I've had a couple of day-long workshops, and I'm actually looking at putting together 2 and 3 day retreats. So everything that I do, it's the 5 Facets Philosophy on healing. So my focus actually is on how we heal in active grief and beyond. Because we can heal through each stage of our grief.
I like these because you've got the academic, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual.
So those are the 5 sides of the self. And one of the things that so many people, when they're in early grief, they think that they don't have what they need to move forward or to heal. And we tend to compare ourselves to other people. You've talked with that with a number of your guests before, and I'm sure you've experienced that. People would say, oh, well, you had your daughter for 28 years, and, oh, you only had yours for 26 minutes. It doesn't matter.
Or the opposite. Well, you got to have your daughter for, 27, 28 years. I only had him for 26 minutes. It's interesting how those kind of conversations come up.
And the comparison, so we compare ourselves to others, we compare ourselves to a previous self, but we also compare ourselves to a perceived self, and all that gets so mixed up. So what I talk about with these 5 facets is that we're all born with the exact same resources. It's just that the details of those resources look different. Our physical bodies are different, our physical environments are different, our mental capacity is different. But how do we then tap into what we have and our resources then to help us move forward? Because it's so individual. The grief is individual and the healing is individual. And so that's...
You know, when you talk about that, I think that one of the things that people lose is the fact that you need to work on what you enjoy. You know, build on some of the strengths that you've had before. If you enjoyed walking, walk again. If you enjoyed golfing, golf again. If you enjoyed reading, read again. If you want to write again. I mean, build on what you've got at basis.
Right. Sometimes I've found in working with people that the memories attached to those things that they used to enjoy actually exacerbate the pain.
Okay.
And so they can't bring themselves to do
Interesting.
that. So what I say is then find something new. If there's
Yeah, okay.
something
I like
that
the
you,
new idea.
if there's something you have thought about
Well, this
doing,
makes sense because
or
I'm thinking, okay, for my parents, they're big golfers, but if you're golfing with somebody that then dies, and you've enjoyed it, maybe golfing is going to be painful.
Maybe you'll change to another sport.
so right. So
I doubt
then, if that is too painful,
Right.
then what is something that isn't painful? And
Right.
maybe there's something that you and your loved one talked about doing. And you get to a point to be able to say, okay, I think I will go jump out of that plane. He always wanted to do
Right.
that and go skydiving. But again, it's unique for each individual.
Great. Where do we find you on the internet?
Everywhere. No. The 5facetsofhealing.com is my website, and then I'm on most of the major social media sites.
Good. And Digging for the Light, and people can go to your chapter in Long Island.
Yes, and come to the conference.
The national conference.
Yes.
We
And
always
come
have
to
them
the
in July
auction
for the
room.
compassionate
And come to the
in
auction
the
room,
auction
come
room.
to your
You should have the auction
room.
online and have people buy it online.
We are thinking about doing that next year. We did.
Love it.
Debbie and
That.
Terry and I explored, and Kathy explored that this year. But it was too
Well, listen, we
soon.
got to close, but thank you
Sure.
for being on the show today. It's been great
Yes,
having you
thank
two
you.
on.
Thank you both for having
Thank you.
us.
Well, Heidi,
Thank you.
wonderful having them on today, and you know, there's some big issues that we've dealt with.
Absolutely, I agree. And they are great examples of how we can not only survive but thrive after loss.
Well, thanks for watching the show today. And Heidi, I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.